These past years have been a great time to be a fan of 40k video games. Space Marine 2 landed with a massive splash at the tail end of 2024, and it was a runaway hit for fans that had been waiting for a sequel for the better part of a decade. That same year, Darktide also really got where it should have been at launch with its Unlocked and Loaded update, and earlier this year released its 5th player class, the Adeptus Arbites, in the summer. Rogue Trader also got its own Arbites content with Lex Imperialis, its second major content expansion, which added a whole bunch more story content as well as a new origin and class. We also got remasters of existing 40k properties. The Space Marine Mastercrafted Edition, which, okay, admittedly this one isn't really a highlight, but we also got Dawn of War Definitive Edition, a bundle consisting of the first Dawn of War and all its expansions but revamped with a dedicated mod loader and settings making it better suited for modern hardware. And that's not even touching on the upcoming stuff that isn't even out yet. Darktide has an upcoming 6th player class that was supposed to be announced on November 11th, and well, that didn't really pan out, but it's still set to release on the 2nd of December. Boltgun is getting a sequel next year where you also get the option to play as a Sister of Battle, and from the sparse trailers we've been getting for it, Mechanicus 2 seems to be coming along pretty nicely, and it'll also now be featuring the Leagues of Votann as a faction in the game, and I sincerely hope they'll be playable just like the Necrons are. And also, there's the fact that Dawn of War 4 is a thing that's happening, something I genuinely believed would never see the light of day after the disaster that was Dawn of War 3. But all the hype that I feel for those projects is completely dwarfed in comparison to one game that I've been looking forward to ever since it was revealed at the Skulls 2025 showcase. Owlcat's newest RPG, Dark Heresy. Owlcat has touched on the 40k setting before with their last RPG, Rogue Trader, but I didn't expect them to make another 40k game so soon, and I certainly didn't expect them to make a game based on Dark Heresy of all things. Rogue Trader must have performed incredibly well if Owlcat is already making a follow-up to it. I never thought that it was impossible for Owlcat to make another 40k RPG, but I didn't expect it to be their next project, and I thought for sure they'd make another fantasy RPG and then maybe dip their toes back into the grim darkness of the far future with Rogue Trader 2, 2 Rogue, 2 Trader. And the fact that the RPG they decided to tackle next is Dark Heresy? Oh my god, I'm completely over the moon right now. I never thought that Games Workshop would ever directly touch this property with a 10-foot pole, let alone license a CRPG adaptation of it. Ever since it was announced, I have been sitting and speculating, wondering what this game is going to be about, trying to rapidly consume any information that Owlcat lets slip about it. So with about a month until the alpha test for the game is available, I figured that now would be a great time to let loose all the wild speculation that I've been percolating in my mind for months now. But before we get into that, I think there's an important question some of you may be asking right now, which is, Zosh, what is Dark Heresy and why are you so hyped about it? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Dark Heresy is one of the games in a series of 40k RPGs and was in fact the first 40k RPG to ever be published, even predating Rogue Trader. Unlike Rogue Trader, Dark Heresy is all about working for the Inquisition to find and root out heresy wherever it may be. It was initially published in-house by Games Workshop's Black Industries, a subsidiary of Black Library, before they shut down literally 3 days after the first edition of Dark Heresy hit store shelves. From there, the expansions for Dark Heresy as well as the rest of the line of the 40k RPGs were handled by Fantasy Flight Games. Fantasy Flight went on to make Rogue Trader, which has already been adapted into a CRPG by Owlcat, Deathwatch, which was a more combat-focused system based around Space Marines and the titular Deathwatch organization, Black Crusade, the first and so far only game where players take on the role of a chaos cult and there are no Imperial options to pick from, and Only War, a combat-heavy system based around the campaigns of the Imperial Guard. In 2014, Fantasy Flight Games created their own take on Dark Heresy with the release of Dark Heresy 2nd Edition, which is my personal favorite TTRPG of all time and played a massive hand in me getting properly into 40k. Unfortunately, 2nd Edition would be a shortly lived system, as Fantasy Flight would announce the end of their relationship with Games Workshop in September of 2016, with their partnership officially terminating in February of 2017. It's actually pretty easy to see just how short-lived it was if you take a look at the number of expansions every other RPG got compared to Dark Heresy 2nd Edition, which only got 3 splat books. If you want more information on why exactly that partnership ended, go check out my buddy Will's video on why Rogue Trader died, link in the description. Anyway, the reason I'm so pumped for it is, as I mentioned, Dark Heresy is what really got me into 40k. Around 2018, some friends of mine invited me to a weekly Dark Heresy 2nd Edition game. Now, at that point, I didn't really have much experience with the grim darkness of the far future. I had painted some minis and played some video games, but that was about it. Dark Heresy changed that. It let me fully immerse myself in the setting in a way that I really couldn't have done before. The games of Dark Heresy that I played shared shaped the lens with which I view the 40k universe. The campaigns I've been a part of are why I find the Inquisition so intriguing, why I despise the Dark Eldar with every fiber of my being, and why I have ingrained in my brain that 9 critical energy damage to the body leaves a target encased in fire, melting his skin and bursting his eyes like superheated eggs. So now that you're all caught up and understand my obsession with the system, you probably realize something. 2 editions of Dark Heresy? And 1 game? But which one will Owlcat use? So that's a bit of a complicated question. Each edition has their merits that I think would make either of them a really good choice for adapting into a CRPG. So before we even get into the actual game stuff, I just want to spend the next, 40 minutes or so comparing and contrasting each system. So let's just get into it, starting with 1st edition. Owlcat is using Dark Heresy 1st edition. I mean, boom, there's a 1st edition logo right there being used for the game logo. It's 1st edition. Bye bye, shut the video off. Okay, but for real, I think that Owlcat is likely going with a hybrid of 1st and 2nd edition. We do already know that the game is going to be set in the Calixis sector from 1st edition rather than the Ascalon sector from 2nd edition. One of the big benefits of 1st edition's setting is that it has that beefy lore. And that's not to say that 2nd edition has no lore to speak of, but the Ascalon sector only appears in 2nd edition, and as such only got 5 books fleshing it out, one of those books being the core rulebook, and the other book being a 146-page adventure book. The Calixis sector, on the other hand, has 17 splat books chock full of lore for it, so there's a lot more there for Owlcat to work with by setting their game in the Calixis sector. Now, just because Owlcat isn't using the Ascalon sector doesn't mean that 2nd edition won't be used at all. I do think they'll incorporate some aspects from 2nd edition into the game. I plan to touch on this a bit more when I talk about character creation, but 2nd edition has a character creation process that I think is a little bit better suited for a CRPG than 1st edition is, mostly due to the way in which 2nd edition has you create your characters compared to 1st edition. I don't think it's completely off the table that the rest of the system will be a hybrid of both Dark Heresies. Owlcat is no stranger to changing aspects of a system to fit better as a video game. Hell, the system Owlcat created for Rogue Trader bears as much resemblance to its source material as I do to Jonah Hill. Which is to say a passing resemblance from a distance, but upon closer inspection the divergence has become significantly more clear. Oh, what the fuck? He's hot now? God damn it, this joke doesn't work anymore. But I could ramble on and on about editions of Dark Heresy all day. I think it's about time that I actually get into my insane conspiracy theories about this game. Before I do that though, I want to make it clear what this video is. This video is half wild speculation and half wishlisting. Unless I specifically say otherwise about information I am presenting, this video is just me going, here are the conclusions I am drawing from the information that I have at my disposal. I cannot guarantee that any of this will be reflective of the final product, or even the product in its alpha state. This video is not me going, here is the information that is confirmed for Dark Heresy. My uncle works at Cat Beard and Gamers Workshop and he told me you can play as a squat with a land train. Alright, have we adjusted our expectations accordingly? Cool, then let's get into it, starting with the lore stuff. The first thing I want to focus on is the lore that Owlcat will be using for Dark Heresy, because unlike Rogue Trader, Owlcat seems to have chosen to use more characters, locations, and plot elements that are already established, rather than creating those in-house like they did with many elements of Rogue Trader. What that means is that we have quite a bit of definitive lore to delve into for those elements, so this part is going to be a little bit less speculative and a little more informative. Now, the first thing I want to take a look at is this big guy right here. Taking what I know from the Rogue Trader trailer, I don't think that this is supposed to be a representation of the player character. I think that this guy is supposed to fill a role in Dark Heresy similar to the role that Theodora von Valencius filled in Rogue Trader, which is to say that he's going to be the one that promotes you to an interrogator or inquisitor, or welcomes you into his inner circle. Now, if you're not in the know, it's easy to think that this trailer inquisitor is just an Owlcat original character, but he's actually not. I am almost positive that our trailer inquisitor is supposed to be Lord Inquisitor Anton Zerb. Now, the image I have on the screen is pretty low definition, but from the trailer we can see that this guy has a similar throne to Zerb, a similar armor to Zerb, flowing locks of hair like Zerb, and most damning of all, take a look at the mask that Zerb's holding. Yeah, I don't think that this many design similarities are a mere coincidence, and also considering other lore elements of Dark Heresy that we'll touch on later, I'm going to drink a shot of Nuln Oil if this isn't Zerb. So that brings into question, Who is Anton Zerb? Anton Zerb is an Inquisitor Lord, first mentioned in the Dark Heresy 1st edition rulebook. He's an Inquisitor of the Ordo Hereticus and apparently a powerful psyker as well. He's also apparently pretty difficult to get a hold of, as he rarely leaves his inquisitorial base, the Bastion Serpentis. I'm going to make an assumption that this Inquisition hallway we see here is Bastion Serpentis, and it's also probably where we start the game. Anyway, Zerb has an interesting and pretty difficult job of working to build solidarity within the Inquisition, as he's disgusted by the factionalism that plagues the organization. And considering how fractured just a single order of the Inquisition can be, he certainly has his work cut out for him. In particular, Zerb has a really strong distaste for the bickering between the inquisitorial subfactions known as the Amalathians, the Recongregators, and the Xanthites. I want to dive into these factions a little bit more later, so just put a pin in them for now. Now, I don't think that Zerb is going to be completely absent from the rest of the game after the prologue like Lady Theodora was. I think that for pretty much the entire game, the player character is most likely going to be working directly for Zerb, given that he is the rank of an Inquisitor Lord, and will most likely be the one that promotes you to an Inquisitor. A promotion like that certainly comes with some strings attached. He may not have a direct thumb on the work that you're doing, but I do think that his influence will be felt as he oversees something called the Tyrantine Cabal, which, much like your promotion to an Inquisitor, I think he's going to induct you into as well. The Tyrantine Cabal is an inquisitorial organization that operates within the Calixis sector and is centered around investigating the phenomenon known as the Tyrant Star. I think that the game is probably going to start with the player character being commended or chastised by Zerb for their actions in the prologue before he inducts them into the Tyrantine Cabal in order to assist with investigations into the Tyrant Star. I think it's likely that Zerb will be a constant contact that we have to report back to during the course of our investigations, and that we'll likely have to continually brief him and the rest of the Cabal on our findings on the Tyrant Star, as well as what we've been getting up to while out in the field. Speaking of, the Tyrant Star is what I want to take a look at next, as it's featured pretty prominently in the trailer as well. And this isn't just speculation. The website confirms explicitly that this is the Tyrant Star, as does the second Dark Heresy trailer. The Tyrant Star is one of 40k's most enigmatic and mysterious lore elements. First mentioned in the Dark Heresy 1st edition core rules, it is a black star that appears above planets in the Calixis sector and brings madness, dark prophetic visions, and mass panic wherever it manifests. Nobody knows why the Tyrant Star appears, why it seems to only plague the Calixis sector, or more importantly, what its origins are. Some see the giant black star that causes chaos whenever it arrives, and make the logical connection of, oh yeah, it's chaos related, which is honestly a fair leap in logic to make, considering the Tyrant Star also causes the creation of more psychers and mutants, and that sounds like your bog standard typical chaos warp fuckery. One small wrench in the works for that theory though is that apparently demons are shit terrified of the Tyrant Star, which, if it was chaos related, then why are demons afraid of it? Others speculate that the Tyrant Star is in some way Xeno in origin. There are some theories that it is an ancient creation of the Eldar, potentially a weapon, and that's all I could find for the Eldar theory. There is shockingly little about that. Another theory proposes that it's related to the Tyranids, since apparently a prophecy regarding the Tyrant Star contains the word devour repeated multiple times. Unfortunately, the full text of said prophecy is kept under the watch of Inquisitor Lord Zerb. Hey, how's it going, buddy? And he keeps very close tabs on who's allowed to look at the full transcript, so we have no real way of knowing for sure. The point being that the Tyrant Star is one of those mysteries in 40k that has remained a mystery. And nowadays, that's pretty rare. For better or for worse, 40k is one of those settings where the audience knows much more about the setting than even some of the most knowledgeable characters that exist within it. For example, Gilliman still has no clue that Lionel Johnson has returned. And I don't mean, oh, Gilliman and the Lion have yet to reunite. I mean that Gilliman still does not know that Lionel Johnson is even awake. So because we as the audience know so much, this means that the remaining mysteries of 40k that we don't have an answer to wind up being really speculative topics. Where did the Tyranids come from? Is Cypher a loyalist or a traitor? Are Felonids really catboys and catgirls, or are they furries? Or are they just like kinda hairy people? The point being that the Tyrant Star is one of those pieces of lore that was brought up once, never touched again, and now pops up every now and then in discussion threads and people love to speculate about what it is. So it'll be nice to finally get a definitive answer on what exactly the Tyrant Star is. Though, worth mentioning, we've maybe had an answer for a while. Okay, so I'm only bringing this up because if I didn't, then someone in the comment section would point out what a buffoon I am for missing this obvious lore. But in the third book, in the Hardlock Legacy adventure for Dark Heresy, it does give an explanation of what the Tyrant Star is, if you're really curious. I don't want to say what exactly that explanation is, because I don't know if Owlcat plans on following this adventure series at all, and if they do follow it, how closely they're going to stick to the modules. They didn't follow any specific adventure module for Rogue Trader, but also they're pulling characters and elements directly from Dark Heresy, where they really didn't with Rogue Trader. And they've also adapted adventure modules in the past with their Pathfinder games. Giving a brief skim of the Hardlock Legacy books, the stuff I see in them doesn't really line up with the stuff I'm seeing in the trailer, but I am still going to err on the side of caution with this and not say what it says the Tyrant Star is, so I don't accidentally wind up spoiling a game that isn't even out yet. But it is also worth noting that GW may not consider these books to be canon anymore. And it certainly wouldn't be the first time they've retconned stuff, and it wouldn't even be the biggest thing that they've retconned. Hell, Squats went from being an entire army, to being completely wiped out, to being, okay, here's a few Necromunda models, to being an entire army again with entirely new lore. So I don't think that Games Workshop has any hang-ups about declaring an old RPG adventure to be non-canon. Now, the Tyrant Star is just the one big threat we'll be facing. I want to pivot to another threat potentially linked with the Tyrant Star. My boys, the Night Lords, are in this game, and just by this trailer alone, my god, they're being done right. They're horrifically brutal just in this small scene, and I love to see it. We actually know that the Night Lords are going to be the primary antagonists in the game, thanks to an interview that game director Anatoly Shestov gave for Windows Central that we'll get into more later. I suspect that the accursed cultists that we also see in the trailer are also connected to the Night Lords, which isn't really the most difficult call considering that, you know, Night Lords are Chaos Space Marines and these are Chaos cultists. Though, considering how Night Lords operate, they may be a little bit more distantly related, as Night Lords don't have typical Chaos cults like other Chaos Space Marine legions tend to. Given the presence of the Night Lords and them being the primary antagonists of the game, it does seem like Owlcat's going with the Tyrant Star having some connection to Chaos. You know, unless the Night Lords and cultists just happen to be here and are suffering from the Tyrant Star as much as the rest of the population is, and that this is just the unluckiest planet in the sector. But even though I said I think the Tyrant Star Chaos theory has some flaws, I do think that it is possible that the cultists and Night Lords are in some way summoning the Tyrant Star to this planet in order to attempt to take it over. I mean, the Night Lords love terror tactics, and the Tyrant Star spreads terror to the entire population of a planet at once. They don't even have to skin anyone alive to get what they want. I mean, they're still going to skin people alive, but you know, it's because they want to rather than because they have to. Totally different. Speaking of the planet that's being terrorized by the Night Lords, yeah, let's talk about that. Thanks to Owlcat's Dark Heresy in a Nutshell trailer, we actually know the exact planet that currently has the Tyrant Star in its orbit. Scintilla, the capital of the Calixis sector. Scintilla is actually a really interesting planet with a lot going on and a surprisingly good amount of lore. Scintilla is classified as a hive world, which, for those not in the know, are planets that primarily have a single massive sprawling city where the population primarily lives. Basically, imagine if every single person on Earth lived in Kowloon, and instead of building out to accommodate, they just built up instead. The upper class tend to live in higher parts of the hive city, and the lower class live in the lower parts, with the poorest of the poor living beneath the city in an area known as the Underhive. The areas outside a hive city are typically pretty desolate and toxic from all the runoff and byproduct a hive city tends to produce, so most people are going to live inside of the hive city rather than on the outskirts of it. Scintilla in particular is home to two hive cities, Hive Cybellus and Hive Tarsus. Hive Cybellus is the proper capital, being larger and much more opulent than Tarsus is. But Tarsus does have its own importance as well, as it is in complete control of all off-world trade and commerce. So Cybellus functions as the administrative center, where Tarsus functions as the economic center. Additionally, there are smaller communities outside the twin hive cities as well that contribute to the planet. Ambulon is one such community, and is often called the third hive city of Scintilla. Ambulon is perched upon the back of a massive Dark Age of technology walking machine that navigates Scintilla's primary continent. It works to dredge up and mine minerals and resources to be supplied to both Hive Cybellus and Gunmetal City, the latter of which we'll touch on shortly. Despite how crucial they are to life in the hives, Ambulon is widely considered by those living in Cybellus to be a cultural backwater, primarily due to the fact that they prioritize stuff like actually being productive rather than beautifying their city and installing more flying buttresses and stained glass windows into their buildings. Gunmetal City is another important community to life on Scintilla. It is a vast series of manufactorums and spires built into a massive volcanic crater on the surface of Scintilla. It is essentially one massive factory town in a valley, producing steel and weapons for Cybellus and Tarsus. That's really all we know about it. Also, just for the purposes of covering my ass for a second here, the lore I got for Ambulon and Gunmetal City is from a site called the Calixis Wiki, which is very clearly a fan project and does not cite any sources, so I can't completely vouch for the reliability of those pages. This could all be fanon stuff as far as I know. Very well written fanon stuff, mind you, but fanon stuff. A more reliable bit of Scintillan lore that I can actually reliably source is that they have their own Imperial Guard regiment, the Scintillan Fusiliers. The Fusiliers are actually pretty interesting, as they're a guard regiment composed of the best and brightest of Scintillan nobility. Unlike many other guard regiments, Fusilier guardsmen do not join out of a sense of duty, forced conscription, or a life debt owed to the Emperor, but for entirely self-serving reasons. Some see it as a way to further their own political careers, others see it as a way to get back at their overbearing highborn parents, and others just see it as a way to escape the droll day-to-day life of Scintillan high society. The Fusiliers are typically not deployed very far from Scintilla and tend to get the softest jobs that a warfront has to offer. For an example of just how pampered these guys are, many Scintillan Fusiliers are often accompanied by a servant at all times. And not just officers, your bog-standard infantry guardsmen tend to have a manservant on hand at all times. I think it's incredibly likely we'll get to meet a lot of Scintillan Fusiliers given that the game is set on their homeworld and they also tend to be deployed not far from their home, and I also have a feeling they'll probably be among some of the least useful people that we'll get the opportunity to meet, given how they seem to be if a country club was a guard regiment. Lastly, I don't really have a good pivot for this, but I want to talk about the Kroot for a little bit, so I'm going to talk about the Kroot for a little bit. We've seen the Kroot shown off as an enemy in the trailer, but we don't really see a lot of varieties in it, just some regular Kroot and a crew talk, so nothing too crazy. Maybe something that is worth noting is that these are the designs of the updated Kroot, which probably means that Owlcat was shown the new designs prior to GW publicly announcing the Kroot refresh. I think it's possibly likely that this game was in the works at least a little bit after Rogue Trader did so well, so I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Owlcat was given some insider knowledge about how the new Kroot would look in order to assist with their development. It should go without saying that I don't think you'll be facing the Kroot in the Hive City proper, so they'll likely be on the outskirts of the Hive City living there in an encampment. If there's any species that's hardy enough to survive a Hive City's wasteland, it's the Kroot, and also orcs. But we haven't seen any orcs yet. I really hope there's orcs. I like orcs a lot. I think we'll probably be given ample opportunity to interact with the Kroot, as one of our companions is also a Kroot. We do see this proper encampment in the trailers, so I think it's not out of the realm of possibility that we'll have more options to interact with him that aren't just giving them lead poisoning. But really, that's all the lore stuff I could pull from the trailer. I think Owlcat has a lot to cook with here. I'm excited to see what they do with it. But all that lore stuff is cool, but you know what? It's for fucking nerds. Yeah, who cares about a well-written and realized setting? I want to talk about my friends that are cool and help me beat people up, and that I can smooch. And by that I mean the companions. We've gotten a pretty good look at the companions so far. The website gives us a preview of 5 companions, and we also know about a few more from trailers and interviews. I want to first start with the website companions, as we by far know the most about them. First up, we have Epion Spess, who has the prestigious role of being one of the top Medicae specialists within the Tyrantine Cabal. She's also apparently just as useful analyzing a crime scene as she is in the Chirurgeon Theater, which makes me think she's going to have a good amount of field utility for cataloging clues and the like. She also seems to be no slouch in combat, being able to attack with her scalpel claws and patch up wounded allies. She obviously has a utility as a combat medic, and I think she'll probably be much more of a utility member rather than a damage dealer, being able to heal and maybe buff allies or debuff enemies. Personality-wise, I imagine she'll be the cold, detached, calculating type with little to no filter. A doctor who spent most of their time around corpses and as such didn't really need to develop any bedside manner. The type of person to answer an inquiry of, "Am I gonna make it, doc?" Not with, "We'll try to make sure you do," or "We'll do everything we can," but with, "Probably not." Hamar Davos is a Catachan jungle fighter, and we're told a lot less about him than we're told about Spess. We basically just get told he's a jungle fighter, and he's good at fighting in a bunch of environments, and he's super badass, and that's about it. Honestly, he kind of seems a little uninteresting as far as companions go. He seems like a far more combat-focused character than Spess is. His reliance on high-speed weapons, as well as the knife in his character art, makes me think he's probably going to be a melee blender, and he'll probably wind up being this game's equivalent to Avalon. However, the phrasing of his weapons being capable of turning the battlefield into a deadly trap in his character description does give me a little bit of pause, as it makes me think he might actually be some kind of board control character. He might actually be based more around making it difficult for your enemies to navigate without taking damage or getting stunned. I imagine his personality is going to be the standard catechin survivalist going on about how everyone's soft since they ain't seen what he's seen, and how he's spent 4 nights sleeping in the hollowed out carcass of a catechin devil. I'm sure we'll probably get some amusing interactions if we do wind up meeting some Scintillan Fusiliers, as he'll probably burst a blood vessel at the sight of these soft highborn guardsmen whinging about everything. Next up is Cog, the character I'm probably looking forward to the most. I love Ogryn. One of my favorite Dark Heresy characters I've ever played was an Ogryn, and I love playing an Ogryn Skullbreaker in Darktide. Cog appears to be what one would expect from an Ogryn. A big, dumb, but lovable and super loyal brute. However, it does mention that Cog has a special cranial implant to make him better understand orders, which essentially means that Cog is a bonehead, an Ogryn who has undergone neural enhancement that makes them think more gooder. I'm going to assume that his general playstyle will primarily be as this big hulking tank, being able to soak damage and deal out heavy AoE melee attacks, and I can't say for sure why, but I think he'll probably have some melee attacks that can destroy cover, or at least significantly weaken it. However, at the same time, I can also see him having the super mobile bull rush that Darktide gives Ogryn by default. But I think the most interesting bit about Cog is his background, specifically because he's from the Scintillan Fusiliers. However, despite being in the Fusiliers, I think it's unlikely that Cog calls Scintilla home. Ogryn and other abhumans like Ratlings fall under the Militarum Auxilia designation, which essentially means that Cog wasn't born on Scintilla, he was assigned to it. That does dash my hopes a little bit, since there was a part of me that was hoping Cog would be this ridiculously posh Ogryn that would complain about all them lowborn types. But, well, I'm sure I'll love him anyway. Moving on to our first Xeno companion, we have what I'm going to choose to pronounce as Rockti. Her bio says that she used to be a tracker and one of the closest followers of her tribe's Warshaper, which let her sense emotion and possess others' memories by eating their flesh. Unfortunately for her, she was cast out by her tribe for breaking the laws of the Shaper. We aren't really told what laws she broke, but considering that Kroot rely on consuming good genetic material, and her closeness to her tribe's Warshaper, I'm going to assume that Rockti may have returned with corrupted or bad meat, which may have caused some issues and illnesses within her tribe. Gameplay-wise, it says she relies on her Kroot rifle and Pekra, her familiar that I am assuming is this bird. Maybe I'm just picking up on some Borderlands Mordecai vibes where there are none, but I'm pretty sure she'll serve a sniper role, probably being able to send out her bird to harass or debuff enemies and maybe deal damage over time. For Rockti's personality, I'm expecting her to be pretty weird and eccentric. As a Xeno, she's definitely someone who doesn't really get human customs and ideals, and as such would probably come up with some pretty horrifying solutions to problems. Effective, but still horrifying. Remember meeting Cassia in Rogue Trader and thinking she's all innocent and sheltered, and then she complains about your crew being a little bit too noisy and suggests ripping their vocal cords out? Yeah, I imagine that's going to be Rockti's whole deal minus the whole innocent part. I'm sure that her solution to at least more than one problem is going to be, why does Rockti, the largest friend, not simply eat the other 5? Larthir Cairnraith? Larthir Cairnraith? Larthir Cairnraith? Larthir Cairnraith? Okay, cool. Is the last companion that we have a comprehensive look at, and the second Xeno that we know of. His bio states that he's an Eldar Corsair, specifically a Wayseeker, which is somewhat the Eldar equivalent to a Navigator, as it's a Wayseeker's job to plot out routes in the webway in a similar vein to how Navigators plot out routes in the warp. He apparently entered an agreement with an unspecified Radical Inquisitor, and then proceeded to set foot on a hive world for some mysterious purpose. I have a feeling that this hive world is Scintilla, and I also have a feeling that we're going to be finding Larthir still on that hive world in-game. The abilities that are lined out for him are pretty simple. He's a Psyker. I expect him to play very similarly to Adira or Heinrichs from Rogue Trader, with the same warp meter thing if you use too many powers. Personality-wise, I'm expecting your signature Eldar superiority. A lot of Monkai this, Monkai that, and I suspect he'll rarely call you Inquisitor. I'm pretty sure we'll also get a lot of, "Grr, we are not friends, Monkai, I am only using you to further my own goals, I am not your acolyte, I can leave whenever I want, I'm not going to leave though." However, I don't think he'll be as uptight as Yearliet, given that he's an Eldar Corsair rather than a craft worlder. Corsairs tend to be a bit less tightly wound, as they're primarily wild-spirited thrill seekers that don't have a commitment to a single craft world. Now, I think that almost all the companions that we've seen so far are going to be fairly early game acquisitions. I'm going to guess that Hamar, Epion, and Cog are going to be the first 3 companions that we get, likely in the prologue, similarly to how we get Argenta, Abelard, and Idira in the prologue of Rogue Trader. I feel that's the case mostly due to the shot of the player acolyte running with them in a hallway decked out with inquisitorial regalia, which, as I stated earlier, I think is Bastion Serpentis, which is where I think you'll start the game. Epion's background already mentions her being in the Tyrantine Cabal, so I think it'd definitely make a lot of sense for her to be there at the very least. I'm not entirely sure about Hamar and Cog, but I don't think it would be too hard to find a reason to put them in the Bastion Serpentis. As far as Larthier and Rockti go, I'm not entirely sure on their order, but I'd be willing to bet that Larthier is acquired first. Primarily to give the party a Psyker if the player isn't already one, and second because go retrieve a dead Inquisitor's acolyte from a hive world they're having trouble on sounds like a pretty good first mission. Also, it would be a pretty cool twist to said first mission to only be told we're collecting someone's acolyte, and then only find out that said acolyte is a Xeno after we find them. I don't entirely know when or where we're going to get Rockti. I think initially it would make a lot of sense to find her at the Kroot camp, but I'm not entirely sure. Remember, she was exiled from her tribe. I don't think it makes a bunch of sense for her to be palling around with a bunch of other Kroot if she's been exiled. Unless this is an entire camp of exiles. I don't really know. Maybe it's possible that she could be a prisoner in there, or when we set to leave the Kroot area, she's getting exiled as we're leaving and have the option to take her into our party then and there, or find her later. And that's it. That's all the info and speculation that I have on the companions that I know exist via the website and the trailers. But in addition to those, we also have 2 unnamed companions. A non-specified tech priest companion that was mentioned in an interview with Owlcat's Anatoly Shestov, and what I believe is an unnamed Sister of Battle companion from this Dark Heresy in a Nutshell trailer. I actually want to cover the sister first because she at least has a portrait we can attempt to dissect some information from. Though she does have the white hair emblematic of our martyred lady, that has to be due to age, as that white armor clearly designates her as a member of the Sacred Rose. Sisters that belong to the Sacred Rose are well known for their ability to remain level-headed and calm during the most chaotic of battles, as well as the capability of using actual battle tactics rather than
smite the enemy!
Given her pretty standard-looking power armor, save for the braziers, as well as power sword and what I'm pretty sure is a bolt pistol tucked under her arm, she's most likely a Sister Superior, the sororitas equivalent of a sergeant. She's most likely a close-range specialist with a high weapon skill and a decent ballistic skill, so she can at least put her pistol to some use. I think that she'll probably serve as a more level-headed version of my beloved Sister Argenta, and by more level-headed I mean still viciously zealous, but goes, hey, let's flank the cultist heavy stubber instead of walking directly into the line of fire, and then charge into glorious melee combat. Which honestly, I'm not entirely sure I'm on board for. Part of the reason that I liked Sister Argenta as a character so much is that she was just unreasonably zealous to a point of insanity, which was really part of her entire appeal. I'm going to miss my completely insane girl boss wife that Owlcat wouldn't let me romance the feckless cowards. The final companion we have to talk about is a tech priest, and we know 2 things for sure about them. 1, they are a tech priest. 2, Owlcat is working tooth and nail to make them romanceable, and that's it. At the very least, that lack of information lets me move on to how I think companion romances are going to work, so let's get into that. I think the biggest way in which companion romances are changing in Dark Heresy is the removal of gender restrictions on what companions you can romance. The success of Baldur's Gate 3 certainly didn't go unnoticed by those at Owlcat, and I think it had a pretty big impact on the development of Dark Heresy. It's not for nothing that Dark Heresy, much like Baldur's Gate 3, is going to be fully voiced, where Rogue Trader wasn't. I think that Dark Heresy is going to take a couple more pages from Larian's notebook and make all the companions romanceable regardless of the player's sex. And honestly, I think that'd be a massive change for the better, as I thought it was pretty lame how picking your sex arbitrarily locks you out of romance options. Having player sexual romance options is kind of just an everyone wins scenario. Also, it actually lets players romance characters that they like rather than only the options that are available. In the base game, lesbian players at least got Jay and Yearlia to pick from. Gay players, on the other hand, only got the bastard. To be fair to Owlcat, they're at least getting better at this. Both Kibella from Void Shadows and Solomorn from Lex Imperialis can be romanced regardless of the player's sex, so they're at least taking some steps in the right direction, but ultimately this shouldn't really be a difficult thing to do. I mean, it's not that new of an idea. Fallout 4 managed to do it and that game came out a decade ago. Now, all that being said, I don't think that every single companion is going to have a romance option. Considering how Owlcat said they're working really hard to get the tech priest romanceable, I don't think they have complete free reign to do that with every single companion. The way they phrased it made it sound like they're getting some pushback from either Games Workshop or internal higher-ups in the company. So here's an image of the companions that I think are going to be romanceable. I think Spes, Hamar, the unnamed Mechanicus companion, and Larthier are going to be romanceable. I don't think that Cog is going to have romance options since he's an Ogryn and maybe too simple-minded to be considered a romantic partner. Also, as much as I prefer otherwise, I think that Owlcat is going to arbitrarily keep the Battle Sister from being romanceable as well. Despite the canon explicitly stating they do not take vows of chastity, I think that some implied chastity vow is why they probably wouldn't give us an Argenta romance option, and I think that'll unfortunately carry over into Dark Heresy. Now, I'm a little on the fence as to whether or not Rockty will actually be romanceable. If we do get the option to romance her, it'll probably be like Yearliet, where it isn't a traditional romance and is more a heavy spiritual connection. Kroot don't really procreate in a standard mammalian way, as they give each other back rubs to reproduce, and also the only orifice that the Kroot have on their body is their mouth, which makes me think that a more traditional romance with a Kroot would definitely not go too well. With the Eldar romance from the previous game, Eldar at least superficially resemble humans, so it feels less weird to us. So much so that it feels odd to a lot of players that Yearliet thinks that an interspecies romance is weird. Rockty, on the other hand, only looks human in the sense that she's a biped. And hell, even that can change. If she eats too much poor genetic material, she can just devolve. I don't think that I would want to come home to find out that my wife got in the pantry and just turned into a dog. All that being said, she does have a statue, and Rogue Trader also had a waifu statue, so, you know, pattern recognition, anything goes, I guess. But companions and all their inner workings are only one part of the game. Certainly a very interesting and important part, but only a single part. A much more important part of the game is you, and me, because we're the players, and RPGs tend to sink or swim on player customization. So how is Owlcat going to make that different in Dark Heresy compared to Rogue Trader? So we don't really know all that much about our player character. The only thing we know for sure, which has been repeated multiple times, is that our character is indeed an Inquisitor. However, I'm going to hazard a guess that we won't be starting the game as an Inquisitor. I speculate that the prologue will have us starting out as an Interrogator, and at the end of it, we'll be freshly promoted to the rank of Inquisitor. Now, typically, ascending from Interrogator to Inquisitor requires the approval of at least 3 other Inquisitors. However, if an Inquisitor Lord wishes to promote an Interrogator to an Inquisitor, they don't need any additional approval. The word of a single Inquisitor Lord is enough, no other Inquisitors are needed. And who do we know that's an Inquisitor Lord? That's right, Anton Zerb. I'm guessing that following the events of the prologue, we'll have done something to garner the favor of Zerb. I imagine there's going to be some crisis similar to the beginning of Rogue Trader, and we wind up saving his life or proving our resourcefulness, and that makes him like the cut of our jib, so he makes us a full-on Inquisitor, as well as inducting us into the Tyrantine Cabal. I think that making the player play as a fledgling Inquisitor would be a really good move. You can still get quite a bit of authority and autonomy, as you are still an Inquisitor, but as a fresh-faced one, you don't have the reputation or influence required to act without consequence or do something like order an exterminatus. But who were we before we became an Inquisitor? Where did our player character come from? Well, inquisitorial agents typically consist of average Joes and Janes from a variety of backgrounds. There is no royal bloodline you must be a part of to become an Inquisitor. It is an earned position, not an inherited one. Now, certainly it isn't uncommon for Inquisitors to be specifically trained for the role since their childhood enrollment in the Schola Progenium, but with enough intuition and a high enough capacity for violence, anyone can become an Inquisitor. Which is to say, I think that Dark Heresy is going to have more character creation options than Rogue Trader, and I want to speculate on what options we'll have. We know for certain that new character creation options will be present in Dark Heresy thanks to an interview that Anatoly Shezdov gave to Windows Central. And I quote, "There are many changes in all of Dark Heresy's game components. Game mechanics are no exception. There will be archetypes, origins, and backgrounds. Some of them will share common themes, even names with Rogue Traders, but even then they will behave in a new way. And of course, there will be brand new archetypes." So yeah, that's hard confirmation on new character creation content. Now, no specifics were given besides broad stuff, but I do think that they're going to rework character creation to bring it closer in line with the tabletop RPGs. With the new archetypes, origins, and backgrounds, I think they're going to be pulling a lot from the RPGs, and I think they're going to be getting most of them from Dark Heresy 2nd edition rather than 1st edition. We can edition war all day about if 1st or 2nd edition is the better one, but I don't think you can really deny that 2nd edition already fits a bit better on the framework that Owlcat has laid out for character creation, as it's a 3-step process of picking your homeworld, background, and class, compared to 1st edition, which just has you picking out a homeworld and a career, which is basically your class, and then advancing down that career's ranks. 2nd edition is also a bit more open in how you can build your character. After you have your homeworld, background, and role set up, you're free to build a character in any way you like. If you want to build something like a medic that also specializes in heavy weapons, go right ahead. 1st edition, on the other hand, is much more heavily restricted. You can only advance forward in your career after spending a certain amount of XP, and you can only increase skills and get talents that are within your career's ranks. I think that 2nd edition's format works a bit better for video games than 1st edition, as having your career be your background instead of your class adds a lot more flexibility to builds, as well as a little bit more freedom of expression to characters. The best way to describe the difference is that 2nd edition lets you build a Hive World arbitrator that is an assassin. 1st edition lets you build a Hive Worlder who is either an assassin or an arbitrator. So with that preamble out of the way, let's talk about what I think is on the table for Dark Heresy. We might as well get what I consider to be the boring one out of the way first. Let's talk about new homeworlds. We'll probably retain all of Rogue Trader's base homeworlds, but see a couple new additions to the lineup. If I had to guess specifically, we'll probably get Shrine World and Agri World as new homeworld options, but I'd be surprised if we get anything else besides that. Though I'm really keeping my fingers crossed we'll see some of 2E's more weird homeworlds as well, like Quarantine Worlds, Feudal Worlds, and Demon Worlds. Though, as I said earlier, I'm not super interested in what new homeworlds are added as options, as I think it's probably one of the less interesting bits of new character creation content. On the other hand, I am significantly more invested in new origins, primarily because I think that Dark Heresy is going to take in a slightly different direction to how Rogue Trader had them laid out. I'm hoping we get to see more options for origins, as well as seeing them become somewhat genericized. So instead of being a Lord General of the Astra Militarum, you just get an option that's Imperial Guard. For me, part of the appeal of being in the Inquisition is that you don't necessarily have to be someone important to get in. Being important certainly helps, but in theory there's a pipeline to allow a random guardsman scooped up from a battlefield to go from reject to adept to explicator to interrogator or even an inquisitor if they're good enough. So I think it would make sense if origins were given less important titles. I think going into Dark Heresy, we're probably going to see most of Rogue Trader's origins retained but renamed. If I had to guess, they'd probably look something like this. So they're no longer a specific role in an organization, but just noting that you have a history within that organization. But enough about the old origins. I want to start speculating on what new origins we may see in Dark Heresy. I think the Adeptus Arbites is probably a guaranteed lock for a new origin. I mean, given that Games Workshop has had 2 of its 3 biggest games release Arbites content around the same time as each other, yeah, I think it's likely that GW has finally figured out what they're doing with the Arbites by now and is probably looking to have them included in future projects. Hell, it was just added as a DLC origin for Rogue Trader, they already have the stats for it. I'm 90% sure this is going to be in the base game of Dark Heresy, and I will be shocked if it isn't. Now, while it isn't a super flashy background, I'd really like to see the Adeptus Administratum added as a player origin. The Administratum is one of the most important factions within the Imperium, and I feel like they rarely get any opportunities to shine. And frankly, I get why. They're boring paperwork nerds. It's hard to adapt filing paperwork as an Administratum clerk into a video game. The closest thing I can think of would be something like Papers, Please. Furthermore, would you rather play as Sergeant Stryker Ironheart McKillen of the Catachan 418th who strangles heretics to death with his biceps? Or Craigius from accounting? However, given the investigation system that they're adding, I think it would make a lot of sense to have a paperwork nerd as an origin for your character. Administratum characters tend to have an eye for details, or at the very least, the ability to retain a large amount of knowledge. I also think it would be a nice opportunity to have an origin that isn't based on combat besides, like, the noble, I guess. I think it'd make a good choice for variety, as well as representing a very underserved part of the Imperium. Adeptus Mechanicus is an origin that I would really like to see added, but I can see why they wouldn't make the cut. Tech priests can work for the Inquisition. In fact, they very frequently do. Any Inquisitor worth their salt will at bare minimum have a tech adept in their retinue, and a Magos is preferred if they can get their hands on one. They also have a wide variety of specialties to boot. Do you need a medic? Get a biologist. Do you have any esoteric tech you can't identify? Get a techno-archaeologist. Is your computer possessed by demons? Call up a Texorcist. There's basically no limit to the amount of varieties of cogboys you can find out there. But despite their utility, members of the Mechanicus tend not to become interrogators or inquisitors. I think. Look, some of my research says they can be inquisitors, but are rare because they tend not to like being an inquisitor. Other sources say they can't ever be interrogators or inquisitors because of their Mechanicus loyalties. I'm kind of in the middle. My personal headcanon is that tech priests can be interrogators or inquisitors, but most prefer not to because they prefer their Mechanicus loyalties over any privileges that being an inquisitor would grant them. Unfortunately, something just kind of gives me the sense that despite how cool it would be, we probably won't be able to play as a tech priest. Lastly, I think it'd be a neat callback to add a rogue trader fleet origin for your character, just as a reference to the previous game. This wouldn't be a character that was a full-on rogue trader, but would have instead been someone that simply worked as part of the fleet. So, like someone who would have served as a voidsman or a laborer on a rogue trader ship. I don't really have any other supporting reasons besides it's cool, and it was an option in Dark Heresy 2nd edition. So, I don't know, I'd give this one like 50-50 odds for actually being added, but if it isn't, it'd kind of feel like a bit of a missed opportunity to me. I kind of like it when anthology-style games have a little bit of a reference to the previous one. But that's all I got for Origin, so oh baby, let's talk about that juicy speculation I'm really excited to get into. Oh boy, new classes. Oh man, what cool classes are we gonna see in Dark Heresy? I don't know. Typically, this is where I would list all of Dark Heresy's rules and go, here's the classes from Dark Heresy. I think it'd be really cool to see a Desperado because I played a Desperado once and liked being able to be the best class in the entire game. But other stuff would be cool too. Maybe they'll add them too, like comment, subscribe, bye, I love you. But Rogue Trader threw me for a bit of a loop as it has classes entirely original to the game that were not present in the tabletop. But I get it, because if it stayed faithful to the tabletop, you'd only be able to pick from a single class in the game, so I get why they changed it for Rogue Trader. Dark Heresy, however, allows for significantly more variety in player classes, as it isn't depending on someone at your table playing the Inquisitor or Acolyte class. It's a system specifically designed to represent the weird, disorganized aspects of being in a warband of inquisitorial acolytes. Classes in Dark Heresy are much more centered around supporting and finding their own niche in a party. Your average warrior is about as tech-literate as someone's geriatric grandpa, so you really want a sage in your party to handle all the computer stuff. But when the rubber hits the road and the bullets start flying, the average sage is going to fold like a used napkin in a firefight, and you're really going to want to have that warrior around. So first I want to talk about what classes I think would make decent additions to the pre-existing lineup from Rogue Trader. I'm primarily basing this on classes that are present in Dark Heresy 2nd edition, though I don't expect every class from that to make the cut. I mean, how exactly would you go about making Ace work in a CRPG? One could even argue that Dark Heresy 2nd edition didn't even make it work. First up, given the more investigative approach to the game, I think that the Seeker class would be a perfect addition to it. In Dark Heresy, Seekers are a class oriented around being perceptive, essentially detectives. They differ from Sages, as Sages can pull up and recall information and facts pretty much about anything, but Seekers have the intuition to draw conclusions from the information that they're presented. To break out the old D&D analogy about the difference between intelligence and wisdom, a Sage knows that a tomato is a fruit. A Seeker knows that tomatoes aren't native to this planet, let alone this subsector, and as such they fetch a high price on the market, so anyone who would have access to it would have to be fairly wealthy. So why did we find a tomato in this Underhive cult shrine? Either someone down here is unusually rich, or this is more than just an Underhive cult. Given how Owlcat has said they have a whole investigation system, which we'll touch on more in the gameplay section, I think that a Seeker would be a really good addition to complement that. I don't think they should make it so that you need to play a Seeker in order to make any sense of the investigations, but I do think that having a Seeker on hand should make investigating easier. Maybe there are some mandatory clues one can find, but a Seeker helps find optional clues that make piecing stuff together a bit easier. Another class that I think would be a really good addition is the Chirurgeon. It always felt a little bit odd to me that there wasn't a dedicated healer companion or class in Rogue Trader, and I kinda get why. Basically, anyone could patch themselves up with a medkit if they had the intelligence for it. But in 40k, medical specialists, especially within the Inquisition, have more specialties than just patching up boo-boos. Within the Inquisition, Chirurgeons often serve double duty as torturers, their familiarity with the human body giving them a unique insight to the frankly staggering amount of things things you can do to a person while still keeping them alive. On top of that, having someone that knows at least basic forensics is probably incredibly useful to an inquisitorial investigation team. The companion Epion Spes I think fits the mold for this incredibly well. If we don't have the chirurgeon as a player class, we at least have what looks to me like a solid confirmation that it'll be available as like a companion class. However, given that all companion classes in Rogue Trader were also available as player classes, if Epion Spes is in fact a chirurgeon, this means that it'll probably also be a player class as well. Lastly, I think a lot of other classes from Dark Heresy are going to just become subclasses. Look, it's really tempting to say, yeah, I think they should put all the classes into Dark Heresy, and while they're at it, I want them to give me a pack of cigarettes, a margarita, and like, I don't know, $30? But honestly, I don't think that every class deserves to be in the game as its own bespoke class, which is why I think that some of them would make much better subclasses. So the following are a few that I think would work pretty well. Keep in mind that I am not a game designer, so my idea for these classes is kind of just off the top of my dome and may either be really bad or ridiculously broken. I think Desperado would be a great pick for a soldier subclass. Focuses primarily on dual wielding, rocking dos pistolas, and having a high mobility, reinforcing a run and gun playstyle. Maybe Desperados could get bonuses to shooting if they use their full move, or maybe attacking wouldn't end their movement and they could still move after shooting. I think Crusader would be an interesting pick for a warrior subclass. It would probably let you be more tanky and maybe give you bonus damage against certain enemies. Maybe at the start of combat, a Crusader randomly marks an enemy, and the Crusader killing or attacking that enemy provides a damage and defense buff to the Crusader, and if the marked enemy dies, it switches to a different target, kind of reinforcing the whole idea of strength through hatred that the Imperium seems to love so much. Hierophant would potentially be a pretty cool subclass for the officer, and I think that it should actually be a non-combat focused subclass. Hierophants, much like officers, are heavily reliant on fellowship, and having a dedicated conversationalist role would certainly do a lot to help with an investigation-based game. I'd also be really interested in seeing how their Sway the Masses ability from tabletop could be adapted to work in a CRPG. I think it's possible, but I'm not sure exactly how I'd go about doing it. Lastly, just give me a penitent for a subclass. I do not care which class gets it, just let me take it. Glass Cannon Flagellant classes that get stronger the more damage they take are so much fun to play. I mean, Darkest Dungeon, Mechanicus, hell, even Paper Mario has that mechanic. So yeah, I desperately want to be able to play one in Dark Heresy. Fuck it, give it to the Operative for all I care, or Blade Dancer if that class makes the cut from Void Shadows to Dark Heresy. I just want to be able to play as a Flagellant. But hey, no amount of bleeding for the Emperor matters if the game doesn't let me make the right kind of questionable moral choices, right? So let's move on from how you can build your character to how you can play your character. And by that I mean the morality system. So I think that Dark Heresy is going to have a slightly different morality system compared to Rogue Trader. Rogue Trader had you choosing between Dogmatic, Iconoclast, and Heretical. Respectively, enact the Emperor's will, do the right thing, and evil chaos option. And while that system works just fine for Rogue Trader, I don't think that a straight copy and paste of the morality system would work well for Dark Heresy, for one big reason. I think that Dogmatic and Iconoclast would probably be fine to keep within Dark Heresy, but full-on Heretical has probably gotta go. Rogue Traders more or less have a license to do mostly whatever they want, so if you want to start carving the Chaos Octet into your forehead, Abelard can only sit next to you and immensely regret not staying in the Navy. But going full-on Heretic in the Inquisition does not fly. Sure, inquisitorial factions call each other filthy heretics over the smallest things like teacup size or something stupid like that. But being full-on corrupted is an excellent way to get your skull ventilated by your inquisitorial peers. Now, I know I just said that Dogmatic and Iconoclast are probably fine, but I do think that they'll get a slight name change to better fit the vibe and lore of Dark Heresy. So let's get into that lore. Hey, you remember those inquisitorial factions I said to put a pin in? Yeah, all the way back in this part, the Amelathians, the Recongregators, and the Xanthites? Well, I think that those are probably going to be the new morality system. And looking at the beliefs of those factions, yeah, it works pretty well for an alignment triangle. The Amelathians are a puritanical faction within the Inquisition. They believe that even upon the throne, the Emperor has a grand plan for humanity, and it is unfolding precisely how he envisioned it. Amelathians believe that the Imperium is perfect exactly where it is, and heavily resist any changes to the status quo. Consider the Amelathians to sort of be the meme of your stereotypical Inquisitor, the kind that insists that humans must suffer so that humanity may live, and the first to go red in the face and scream heresy at the idea that the best way to deal with a problem might not be to light it ablaze in holy fire. The Recongregators are pretty much the exact opposite. A radical faction of the Inquisition, they believe that the Imperium has become decadent and corrupt over its millennia of stagnation, and that the best course of action is to completely rebuild it from the ground up. Individual Recongregators may disagree on the speed by which the Imperium must be rebuilt. Some prefer swift and fast action, others slow and gradual, but they all agree that there has to be a change to the status quo. Recongregators are always willing to shake things up and often embrace any change possible, for better and for worse. For instance, a Recongregator could subtly work with or influence a planetary governor to change their citizens' lives for the better, but they're equally likely to show up on a feudal world, force a bunch of lasguns into the hands of peasants, point them toward the planetary capital, and yell, "It's the year 40,000, get with the times, go do an October revolution." Now, the Xanthites are kind of their own thing, somewhat separate from these groups. An incredibly radical faction of the Inquisition, Xanthites heavily favor the use of demon-possessed weapons, demon hosts, and generally using chaos to fight chaos. While many Inquisitors consider Xanthites to be heretics, it is worth noting that Xanthites do not advocate straight-up falling to chaos, just using it wisely. They see their methods as no different than the Imperium using the warp to travel. They are the definition of by any means necessary. To a Xanthite, the ends always justify the means. It is worth noting that the namesake of this belief, Inquisitor Lord Zarenchek Xanthus, was executed for being a heretic. So, make of that what you will. All in all, a morality system based on the Amalathians, Recongregators, and Xanthites feels like the most natural fit for Dark Heresy. It keeps the same triad of options from Rogue Trader, but reinterprets it through the lens of the Inquisition's constant infighting and philosophical divides. Instead of good or evil, it becomes stability versus change versus dangerous pragmatism. Given that I previously mentioned that Zerb frequently has to oversee these factions, and we're working for him, I think it would be a massively missed opportunity to not use them as the basis for the morality system. It feels like something purpose-made for this game over a decade in advance. Not using it for the morality system feels like missing the easiest slam dunk of your career. But mechanics are only one part of the wider picture. Morality is only defined by the world it operates in and the choices that you make within it. So with all that dumb philosophy for nerds junk out of the way, let's talk about the fun stuff. Blowing holes in cultists and poking around grimy hive cities. How's Dark Heresy actually going to play? When I originally began working on this video, I figured that Dark Heresy would just be an asset flip of Rogue Trader, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in the way that New Vegas is technically an asset flip of Fallout 3. The same engine and underlying mechanics are being used as a skeleton for a new game to be built on top of, with minor things tweaked under the hood. Like how New Vegas has proper aiming down sights, and speech checks are binary rather than having a percentage to succeed or not. And I would have been fine with that. I figured it was an easy way to do it, and partially why Dark Heresy is coming out so relatively quickly after Rogue Trader. However, a recent interview with Owlcat executive producer Anatoly Shestov, conducted by The Gamer, revealed that a lot is actually being changed with the game. Quoting directly from the article, "We will be redoing everything from scratch, even the design things, mechanical things, abilities, options, role-playing systems. There will be changes even in the basic stats. There will be changes in ways the player can itemize things, and there will be significant changes in the tone of the story and the way that we tell this particular story." This was further expanded upon by Shestov in a later interview he gave with Windows Central. When asked to what extent Dark Heresy will remain similar to Rogue Trader, he had this to say. "The combat will remain turn-based, yes, but there will be significant changes in the momentum system, covers and line-of-sight systems, bursts and AoE attacks, and much more. Will it look like something familiar? Yes. Will it give the same user experience, evolve around the same cognitive processes? No. The exploration goes even further. There won't be a full sector to discover, there won't be space battles this time, but a whole new layer of things will surround you on a ground level. As an Inquisitor, an entirely new investigation system is needed to gather, interpret, and analyze these things, to make conclusions based on the results, and to make a verdict, even one that doesn't align with anything being found. And a gun cutter. There will be a gun cutter." There's a lot to cover here, so let's break it down in order, starting with combat, which honestly I don't really want to dwell on too much, as it seems much more like combat is getting tweaked but not overhauled, which I honestly think is a good thing. I thought that Rogue Trader's basic combat mechanics were pretty good. It did the job, and I think it did it pretty well, so I think it's a good thing that it sounds like the changes coming to the system are more stoning and polishing rather than completely reinventing the wheel. They primarily specify minor things that are being changed, like AoEs and burst attacks, but the thing I'm most curious about is how they're going to change momentum. I think that Dark Heresy might see a small nerf or rework of momentum abilities, as the balance for them was a little bit fucky. Most abilities were fine. I personally thought some were underwhelming, but whoever thought that Finest Hour should be Officer's basic tier 1 ability? I'm not saying you need to stop, but please maybe smoke less crack. In my experience playing, Finest Hour let me absolutely stunt on and make a mockery of combat. Being able to give an ally an extra turn with completely refreshed movement and action points is already pretty good. Putting no limit on the amount of attacks they can do in that extra turn is nuts. Most fights just became me waiting around until I could point at Abelard or Argenta and yell, "Go my hydrogen bombs, destroy these coughing babies!" And so I kinda welcome any tweaks to momentum. Maybe give Officer a different skill, or make it so Finest Hour is just an extra turn with a regular amount of attacks. Or hell, maybe even go in the opposite direction and balance it around momentum being intended to be a super broken thing and plan combat accounting for players using it whenever they can. I'd really be fine with either option, just as long as it works well. Also, my last request for combat, I know it's unrelated to momentum, but please make lasguns sound less like generic sci-fi laser pew-pew sound, thank you. Shifting away from combat, let's talk about exploration. It seems that things are going to be scaled significantly smaller than Rogue Trader, and I actually think that works better for Dark Heresy. I don't think it would have worked for Rogue Trader to have a smaller world, as that game is all about a grand profit-driven adventure as a space privateer, but I don't think that would work as well for Dark Heresy. Dark Heresy campaigns tend to be grittier, more intimate affairs, being less focused on high adventure and more pulling investigative threads and uncovering a localized conspiracy. It is not meant to be a sector-treading grand adventure. I actually think that the scale will be small enough that it might even be constrained to a single planet. Owlcat's Dark Heresy in a Nutshell video only names the capital planet of the Calixis sector Scintilla. Additionally, the Tyrant Star only affects a single planet at a time, so it would make sense that in order to stop it, you'd have to stay on the planet that it's currently terrorizing. But even on a smaller scale, I don't think that the game is going to have any less depth than Rogue Trader. With Rogue Trader, Owlcat could afford to not make everything the most complex. There's certainly lots to uncover should you want to find it, but locations had a tendency to focus more on being unique rather than incredibly deep. Playing for a few hours in Rogue Trader brings you to a new planet, so it creates a sector that is as wide as an ocean but as deep as a swimming pool, which, I want to be clear, works well for Rogue Trader because you don't need every single location to be the most in-depth and detailed place. You don't need to be able to explore all the way down to the Underhive in every single location. It's just not really feasible for Owlcat to do. But given the smaller scale, Dark Heresy can't afford to design its world in a similar way to Rogue Trader. It simply wouldn't work. If your entire game is set on a single planet, you can't design that planet like it's Rykad Minoris, where it's just the one city on the planet. To make a smaller scale setting work, you need more depth of exploration, and you also have to get away from the sci-fi tendency to give planets a singular biome or trait, which is something that 40k loves to do, considering how planets are typically given a single classification. Thankfully, I think that Owlcat knows this, as the interview specifically mentions that exploration goes further than it did in Rogue Trader. Now, Scintilla, the primary setting, is classified as a hive world, and a lot of the locations shown off in the trailer look like they fit right into a hive city, appearing very industrial in their construction. But being set in a singular hive city doesn't mean we'll see a lack of variety of locations. Darktide showed that it's actually pretty easy to get a wide variety of locales out of a single hive city. Yes, a lot of Tertium is your standard industrial fare, I'm not here to argue on that point. But areas like the Hourglass and Clandestium Gloriana managed to add a desert and a snow region to a hive city. Even Tertium's more standard hive city locations are each distinct and different from each other with their own unique flavor. Missions set in Throneside have the opulent buildings and prominent imperial statuary looking over the cobblestone streets. The Torrent has a near constant downpour, makeshift living quarters, and structures you really hope aren't load-bearing, but no, they probably are. And the Carnival is doing its best to look like a wretched hive of scum and villainy that it probably was even before the Nurgle corruption. I have no reason to believe that Owlcat will be slacking on memorable locations, as we've already seen some unique unique areas in their trailers. There's this inquisitorial hall we've seen in a ton of shots, which I'm fairly certain is Bastion Serpentis, and will likely serve as your main base for the game in the same way that the Von Valencius flagship served as your base in Rogue Trader. We have this incredibly eerie looking place right here, which looks to be a servitor colony, given the pillar of servo skulls in the middle and the servitors strung up on these thick wire trees. And there's this toxic dump area that I'm not sure if it's supposed to look like it's just worn down and abandoned, or if it's been corrupted by chaos. On one hand, it's normal for hive cities to pump out a ton of toxic sludge. On the other hand, is it just me or is this pipe made out of bones? I don't think that's up to code. The part in the trailer with some Kroot looks to be taking place in a more wastelandish looking area that could pretty easily be on the outskirts of a hive city. We actually get a decently good look at the Kroot area as it appears in multiple shots, and it looks to be a full-on Kroot camp or colony. We can also see that we may be encountering some Kroot in the same location as the servitor colony, as you can see the thick branches of the wire trees in the background. Maybe getting through that servitor colony is on the way to the Kroot camp, or we're ambushed by them in the servitor colony. Speaking of Xenos, there's also this shot with a massive webway gate. Now, there's no way this thing is in the middle of a hive city. Sure, the Eldar are sneaky, but they're not completely hide all of this inside a hive city sneaky. Additionally, those spikes don't give me a ton of confidence that this is an Eldari location, if you catch my drift. And Eldar are kind of a lore blind spot for me, but I don't recognize this as the symbol of any particular craft world. Oh shit, gang, I think we might be going back to Kamara. Finally, I want to speculate on areas that we have yet to see, but will probably be incredibly likely to make an appearance in the game. I think it's pretty much a given we'll see an appearance of the Spire, a hallmark of most hive cities where the upper class and planetary governor tend to reside. If I had to guess, I think that this area with the big statues is likely in the Spire, since it looks to me like there's a presence of natural light, and the Spire and outer parts of the hive city tend to be the easiest place to see the sky. Moving in the opposite direction, I can almost guarantee you we'll be seeing the Underhive. The grimy opposite of the Spire, the Underhive is where all the dregs and poorest residents of a hive city wind up living. Now, I haven't seen anything that looks explicitly Underhive-y in any trailers, but considering just how many cults and criminals come up from the Underhive in 40k lore, I wouldn't be surprised if we had to go poking our noses around there at some point. Speaking of poking our noses into things, let's talk about that investigation system that was briefly brought up. We really don't know much about it besides the fact that it exists. Judging from its brief description from the interview, it seems like it'll be based on gathering clues, conducting an analysis, and coming to your own conclusion. That's all we have to go on, which really isn't all that much. I think my ideal scenario would be this game having a Shadows of Doubt style menu where we can connect our clues in our investigation and come to our own conclusions, though without the issues that Shadows of Doubt had due to it being procedurally generated. I think that the best thing this game can let you do is come to the wrong conclusion based on the evidence that you have. I don't think the game should slap your hand away and go, Acolyte, I don't think that's the right answer. Go back to forensics and try again. It should allow you to make mistakes and have those come back to bite you in the ass. But on the other hand, I do think that we should receive at least some positive feedback when we make a correct conclusion. I think the best way to do this would be to only tell us if we were right or wrong after we do something we can't easily walk back on. Having to commit means you have to live with the choices you make, which could have a knock-on effect over the course of your investigation. If you don't save scum like a little bitch, that is. That way you have an incentive to do it right the first time to avoid a high body count potentially interfering with your investigation. Unless that is your preferred investigative approach is to just boot the door in, yell, "Inquisition, bitches!" and then shoot the rats that go running. On booting the door in, I'd love to see different investigation methods be at our disposal. Having a wide variety of ways an investigation can be approached would be fantastic for replay value, even if the general mystery remains the same. Sure, I'd love to see the NCIS approach to investigation, but don't make that the only way to gather clues. I know I just joked about it, but booting the door in, yelling you're with the Inquisition, and grabbing anyone who makes a break for it could serve as a valid way to gather clues, or at least people for interrogations. Hell, I've lost count of how many investigations in my own Dark Heresy games have involved breaking down a door, loudly announcing our inquisitorial authority, and then throwing an entire bandolier of flash grenades into the room. Different classes could also have different methods of investigation. Give officers the ability to coerce clues out of folks on the street, or give them a skill that lets them pick out what's hearsay and what's fact. Warriors and soldiers would most likely be able to pick up on weapon damage left at the scene of the crime, identify ballistics, and would be able to figure out what kind of people would have access to specific types of weapons. Operatives could maybe pull clues from cogitators and security systems, or maybe grease the wheels to get the info that they want. I hope we're also able to miss stuff too. I think it'd be really neat to have to return to the scene of a crime and look around for more leads that we may have missed the first time around. Maybe before we didn't have a high enough perception to notice the front door at the crime scene looked to be forced open. Or maybe we're racking our brains seemingly out of leads until we realize that a witness testimony had a few too many details for them just to be an innocent bystander. Additionally, give us stuff to sidetrack our primary investigation. What if one of our suspects isn't involved in the whole Tyrant Star affair, but they are a cold trader? Do we allocate the resources to stopping the cold trade, or do we stay on the case and let them be for the time being? You know, there's bigger fish to fry. Do we even care that they're a cold trader? Should we? Misdirections like that are prime for opening up new investigations, great for side quests, and perfect fodder for the morality system. They also make the world feel so much richer and more alive, even if the choice is ultimately just, hey Bosh, do we fucking kill this guy or what? I think it's starting to sound less like I want an Inquisition RPG and more like I want a detective RPG, and you got me. But I think that a game that's about an inquisitorial investigation should at the very least have decent investigation mechanics. I really hope that Owlcat is able to pin down a solid investigation system that at the very least makes us feel like we're piecing together a mystery. I think the worst thing they could do is just make the investigation system something that only has a single correct answer with one path of getting there. I have quite a bit of faith in Owlcat though. From their interviews, it really seems like they're pushing this investigation system and talking up its depth and mechanics. They seem to understand what the core identity of Dark Heresy is supposed to be, pulling at a conspiracy theory until the whole thing unravels before your eyes. I think there's a lot of potential with this game. Owlcat already knocked it out of the park with Rogue Trader, and I'm really excited to see what they do next with Dark Heresy. It's good to know they aren't just resting on their laurels and making another 40k RPG that's exactly the same as the last one, but with a 2 tacked on the end. The change in scope and investigation system are both risks for them, trying something different that may or may not work, and no matter how it goes, I certainly applaud the effort. And I think on that note, that's a good time to wrap it up and get to my final thoughts. I'm honestly a little impressed by how close Owlcat has been keeping all this info to their chest. I kind of feel like I really had to go out on a limb a little bit more than I thought I would have needed to. Despite yapping for holy shit that fucking long, I feel like I've barely scratched the surface and think that even if I'm right about absolutely everything that I've said so far, we're still in for more than a handful of surprises when Dark Heresy finally drops. I certainly hope that all the new features and whatnot they talked up are actually new and full-fledged features, not just fancy realistic fish AI to get us to buy 40k RPG another one. But I really have no reason to doubt Owlcat. I'm not the biggest CRPG guy, but it does seem like they have a pretty solid pedigree and reputation. The games may launch a little buggier than they should, but they get patched and tend to ultimately be pretty well regarded. They're certainly no Larian, god no, but the general impression I get from Owlcat is a dev team that hits more often than it misses. But I suppose we'll just have to wait until Dark Heresy's alpha releases next month. Sure, it isn't the final product, but it should at least serve as a showcase of some of the basic stuff like character creation, the world, and the in-game systems. When it does, feel free to come back and leave a comment telling me everything that I got right. Unless, of course, I'm completely wrong about everything, in which case I will disable my comments, crash out on Blue Sky, and livestream myself blowing my shit smooth off. But in this last little bit of video, I want to move away from speculation about the game, and instead speculate on what Owlcat's Dark Heresy might mean for the 40k IP as a whole. So hey, if you are only here for speculation about the upcoming Dark Heresy CRPG, and just wanted to ride the hype train for a little bit, this is your stop. You can get off here, no hard feelings. I'd just appreciate it if you liked, commented, and maybe subscribed on your way out. That would be very nice of you. Thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Alright, everyone gone who's going? So obviously the past however many minutes have been rife with so much insane speculation you probably think I'm a crazy person. But we are about to violently veer off the road of fairly baseless speculation and into the roadside ditch of I need to take my meds. I can't say for sure, but maybe the fact that Games Workshop is touching Dark Heresy again may mean they're getting a little cozier with third-party content and maybe, potentially, possibly, making it more explicitly canon. I mostly say this because the story of the game is centered around the Tyrant Star, a piece of lore that has basically remained untouched since it was first introduced by Fantasy Flight Games in their Dark Heresy adventures. Since the partnership between GW and Fantasy Flight ended, Games Workshop has given all of Fantasy Flight's lore a pretty wide berth. A lot of this has mostly been due to, from what I understand, that the stuff that Fantasy Flight created for the line of 40k RPGs exists in a weird state where it's somewhat unclear who the copyright holder is. Fantasy Flight clearly doesn't have ownership over the 40k setting, that goes without saying, but do they have the rights to the guard regiments they created for the setting? What about original Xeno species like the Rock Ghoul and Yuvoth? I think that Games Workshop had just decided to play it safe and not touch those aspects of the lore in order to avoid a potential legal debacle. The safest thing for them to do was take a position of not explicitly declaring anything non-canon unless it butted up against established lore and they needed to. But that position has changed a little bit recently. 2019's Necromunda expansion, The Book of Judgment, directly references both the Rock Ghoul and Yuvoth by name, by adding the Rock Ghoul Razor Gun and Yuvoth Puzzle Box as black market Xenos equipments for your gangers. This trend continued to a lesser extent with the 2022 release of Darktide, which saw yet another reference to the RPGs with the Macabian Dueling Sword, its name a reference to the world of Macabia, home of the Macabian Janissaries Guard Regiment, which were created by Fantasy Flight for Only War. Sure, it's not as direct a reference as name-checking the minor Xeno species that Necromunda did, but it's still a reference. There's also, the fact that Rogue Trader is a game that got approved and made, and that Dark Heresy also got approved and made. Two RPGs that are both directly based on and pulling from the work and lore of a third-party partner that once worked with Games Workshop. I'm sure most of you watching this are well aware of how protective Games Workshop is about their lore, for better and for worse. For better, because most licensed Warhammer products at least feel like they're part of the same universe. I haven't played a 40k game that felt incongruous with the setting ever. Granted, part of that is probably because they make you slap Warhammer 40,000 in front of most titles these days, but it still says a lot for the brand integrity. For worse because, hey my fellow Darktide players, how's it going? Boy, that new Mechanicus class sure is something, huh? Hey, PhoneZosh here. I just wanted to show that I'm done recording my audio for this, and the day that I have finished is November 13th. And due to the delays in the reveals of the new class that Fat Shark had to do, which, if the rumors are true, is because of Games Workshop, and I think further sort of solidifies my point about the iron grip they have on their IP, that means that whole Mechanicus statement was a shot in the dark. So, did I get it right?
No. Okay, let's get back to the video.
Hey, remember how neat it was when there was that bug to be able to run around shirtless and kill heretics while blasting bare chest? Wouldn't it be neat if Fat Shark made that bug an intended feature of the game? Well, you can't have that because Games Workshop took one look at it and went, actually that doesn't fit with our lore, and had Fat Shark remove it. Yeah, Games Workshop. Nobody in the grim darkness of the far future fights without a shirt on. But hey, at least you can peruse the fine selection of paid cosmetics. You know what? Let's check out what the Arbites have got since they've been added in June. The point being that if Games Workshop wanted to, they could just say to any partners, yeah, don't touch that stuff, internally we don't consider it canon, but we can't explicitly say that it isn't. But they're not doing that. They seem to be touching more and more on third-party content and weirder bits of lore, and I think that it's a change for the better. Maybe I'm reading into this a little bit too much, but I think the slow reintroduction of old RPG content is showing a more open-minded experimental side that Games Workshop hasn't shown in a while. Maybe they're finally coming around to the idea that all these old Fantasy Flight era bits and pieces of lore only serve to make the setting deeper and more interesting. If they're bringing stuff like the Tyrant Star and Yuvoth out of the archives, I'm really excited to see what they do next. I hope that Dark Heresy is enough of a slam dunk to give Games Workshop that final push they need to fully embrace the RPG lore as much as I want them to. Or maybe they already are. On the Catachan page of the 10th edition Guard Codex, we see some Catachan jungle fighters battling these things. At first I went, neat, they're fighting Vespids. Then I realized these only have a passing resemblance to Vespids. Okay, so maybe they're Tyranids. The page does mention a Catachan unit that specializes in fighting Tyranids, but these things look even less like Nids than they do Vespids. So they're probably just a minor Xeno species that will appear in a single piece of art and never again. Or they're Rock Ghoul. Look at them. They have a similar head, especially with that hooked lower jaw, the same gangly semi-insectoid body and those hooked forearms. Sure, this one has eyes and they don't look exactly the same as the old Rock Gull art, but my counter to that is that both of these models are clearly Cadian shock troopers. Despite having wildly different helmets, lasguns, and uniforms, nobody would ever argue that these are two different unrelated guard regiments. So why can't these both be Rock Gull? What I'm trying to say is, Codex Rock Gull confirmed to launch summer 2026 as part of the 11th edition box set. Wake up, sheeple!